During dinner, my parents said the entire inheritance would go to my sister, not to an adopted daughter like me, but when I became rich, they demanded a share. The first time my mother called me lucky, I was 9, balancing on a wobbly stool at the kitchen sink because the faucet didn't reach the bottom of the dish bin. The water was too hot. My hands were turning that angry pink that meant they'd itch later, and my sister was in the living room sprawled across the couch, laughing at something on the television like she owned the air in the room. My mother didn't even look at me fully. She kept her eyes on the pot she was scraping, and she said it like a casual fact. "You're lucky we took you in. Most kids don't get a roof. Lucky. Not loved, not wanted. Lucky. I'm Nadine. I'm a woman. I'm 25, and I'm adopted." That sentence alone comes with 1,000 assumptions from strangers. But my issue was never strangers. Strangers are clumsy, curious, sometimes rude, but they don't live in your bones. The people who raised me did. My parents worked hard. My father did factory shifts that left him smelling like metal and sweat. And my mother sewed for neighbors and picked up whatever side work she could find. We were not rich. We were counting coins in the jar on the counter, poor. We lived in an old house in a neighborhood where the sidewalks were cracked and the streetlights blinked like they were tired. Some months the fridge looked like a sad joke. But money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how love in that house always came with a receipt. There was always a tally. And somehow my sister never owed anything. My sister was older, biological, and treated like she came with an invisible warranty. If she had a bad day, it was a crisis. If I had a bad day, it was attitude. If she forgot chores, my mother laughed and called her a dreamer. If I forgot something, my mother went cold and reminded me, "We didn't have to take you." My father wasn't loud all the time. That would have been easier to name. He was mostly quiet, which somehow made him scarier. He'd sit at the table with a stiff jaw and just watch everything like he was waiting for someone to mess up so he could justify being angry. When he did speak, it was short, flat sentences that landed like stones. By the time I was 12, I could run the house like a little exhausted manager. I knew which bills were late because my mother narrated it out loud like she was the main character in a tragedy. I knew how to stretch groceries into dinners that lasted. I learned to read the temperature of a room the way some people read weather. I learned when to disappear. I learned how to swallow feelings so fast I didn't even taste them. And I learned how to be useful. Because being useful was the only thing that made me feel vaguely safe. The clearest snapshot of my childhood is my sister's 15th birthday party. My mother went all out, which meant balloons, decorations, food, the whole thing. Neighbors came with gifts and big smiles. My sister posed for pictures like she was on a magazine cover. I floated around refilling cups, wiping spills, and quietly managing the chaos. At one point, a woman I didn't recognize asked my mother, "And who is she?" My mother didn't even hesitate. "Oh, that's Nadine. She helps me." Like I was a neighbor kid she'd hired for the afternoon. That night, after everyone left, my mother hugged my sister and said, "You deserve the best." Then she looked at me and said, "Don't sulk. You should be grateful." I wasn't sulking. I was empty. There's a difference. When I turned 18, I moved out as fast as I could manage, which wasn't fast because I had no money and no safety net. I rented a tiny room in a crowded house with one bathroom that always smelled like cheap cleaner and old damp towels. The walls were thin enough that I could hear other people's lives through them, which was somehow both comforting and depressing. I didn't have a car. I took the bus everywhere. Sometimes I walked because the bus schedule didn't care that I had to work. I got a job at a convenience store a few blocks from my parents' house, mostly because it was close enough that I could make it on foot if the bus was late. The store wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. It gave me structure. It gave me a paycheck. And it gave me one person who saw me. My coworker was a woman around my age, and from the first week, she had this quiet, watchful way of noticing things without making you feel inspected. She didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't do that fake pity voice. She just treated me like I mattered, which sounds dramatic, but when you grow up with conditional affection, being treated normally feels like a miracle. The first time she saw my mother in the store, she waited until my mother left, then said low and certain, "She doesn't talk to you like a mother." I laughed like it was a joke because my body didn't know how to accept the truth without deflecting. But the sentence stuck. Even after I moved out, I kept going back to my parents' house. Not because I wanted to, but because guilt was wired into my spine. My mother would call with that heavy sigh and say she worried. If I didn't visit, she'd tell people I'd forgotten where I came from. If I did visit, she'd find something to criticize, then mention how much they'd sacrificed, then ask for a little help with something. It was always framed like a family thing, like I was part of the team, but I wasn't. I was the bench player they only remembered when they needed someone to run onto the field and take a hit. I knew I wasn't loved the same way. I knew it. I felt it in the way my sister's name was said with warmth and mine was said like someone stepping in gum. But knowing something and accepting it are two different beasts. I kept hoping, like an idiot, that if I was patient enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, they'd eventually look at me and see a daughter. Then, on a Friday night that smelled like fried food and exhaustion, my mother texted, "Family dinner. Important." Important meant my stomach tightened. Important meant someone needed something. Important meant I should bring my best neutral face and leave my feelings outside the house. I showed up anyway, because of course I did. My sister was already there, sitting at the table like she'd been invited to a ceremony. My mother had set out plates she rarely used, which should have been my first clue this was a performance. My father sat at the head of the table, quiet and stiff, like he'd rehearsed his role. We ate in that tense way families do when nobody actually likes each other but everyone is pretending there's love in the room. My sister chatted about her job and her plans and her stress, which was always treated like a national emergency. I mentioned my shift schedule and that my rent might be going up again, and my mother made a little dismissive noise like I'd commented on the weather. Then my father cleared his throat. "We've been getting our things in order." I blinked. Like, what things? My mother smiled. Too bright, too controlled. Grown-up things, planning, the future. My sister's eyes flicked to me and I caught a smirk. Not a full grin, just a small curl of satisfaction, like she already knew how this would go. My father said, "We don't want confusion later." "Confusion about what?" I asked. And even as I said it, my chest tightened because I already knew. My mother set her fork down carefully. "Inheritance." I let out a short laugh, not because I thought I'd get anything, but because the idea of them planning something and including me felt like a bad joke. My father stared at his plate. "The house. Whatever is left. It's going to your sister." Silence sat on the table like a heavy pan. I looked at my mother. "Okay, and..." My mother shrugged. "And that's that. Blood is blood. You've had a roof, food, a name. You've had more than you would have otherwise." My sister leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, "I mean, it's not like you were ever really part of this. Adopted." The word wasn't said, but it hung there anyway. My father finally looked up. His eyes were flat. "You should be thankful. We didn't have to take you." My throat tightened so hard it felt like I'd swallowed something sharp. I wanted to scream, to throw my plate, to do something dramatic. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do. I nodded like a good little guest. My mother added, "We made sacrifices you'll never understand." I stared at her. "So you brought me here to tell me I'm not family?" My mother scoffed. "Don't be dramatic," my sister snorted. "Here we go." I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping the floor, and my hands shook. "Thanks for dinner." My mother said, "Don't storm out. That's childish." I didn't storm. I walked. I walked out of that house and down the street and kept walking until the neighborhood got quiet and my lungs burned. In my rented room, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud. My sister's voice kept replaying, "You were never really part of this." I didn't sleep. I scrolled aimlessly on my phone, watching strangers' lives through a screen because mine felt like it had been put on pause. I thought about calling my coworker, but pride stopped me. I thought about calling my mother and begging for what exactly? A hug? A lie? I hated myself for even wanting it. The next morning, I dragged myself to work on caffeine and spite. My coworker took one look at my face and said, "Rough night?" I shrugged. "Family stuff." She didn't push. She just handed me a cup of water and said, "Eat something when you can." That small kindness made my throat burn again, which is pathetic, but also, it's what happens when you've been starving emotionally for years. A crumb feels like a meal. Later that week, during a slow stretch at the store, my coworker brought up the dinner without even naming it. She just said, "You look like you got punched in the soul." I laughed, which came out brittle. That's one way to describe it. She leaned on the counter, pretending to straighten candy bars while she watched the door. "Do you want to talk? Or do you want me to stand here and make sure nobody tries to bully you today?" I felt my eyes sting. "Both? Done," she said, like it was the easiest decision in the world. After the shift, she asked if I wanted to sit somewhere and eat something that wasn't from the store. A coffee shop down the street, nothing fancy. I almost said no on autopilot, because in my family, Accepting anything turns into a debt. Then I realized she wasn't my mother. She wasn't keeping score. So I said yes. We sat at a small table with those cheap napkins that disintegrate the second you actually need them. I stared at my cup and admitted quietly, "They told me I'm not getting anything, like I should have expected it." But hearing it out loud made it final. My coworker didn't do the fake shock. She didn't do the, "but they're your parents" speech. She just said, "That's cruel." I swallowed. "They act like adopting me was charity." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes people adopt because they want a child. Sometimes they adopt because they want someone smaller to control. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because I've watched your mother talk to you like you're an employee." My throat tightened. I hate that I still want them to love me. She shrugged gently. "Of course you do. You're human." I wanted to kiss her on the forehead for that sentence alone. Not in a weird way. In a, "thank you for not treating me like I'm broken" way. On the walk home, I kept replaying her words. Not because they were new, but because they were said without cruelty. It was the first time the truth didn't come packaged with a slap. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was folding laundry on my bed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I'm the kind of person who lets unfamiliar calls go to voicemail because I assume it's either a scam or a dentist appointment I didn't schedule. But something made me answer. "Hello?" A man's voice, professional but not cold. "May I speak with Nadine?" This is she. "My name is..." "I'm calling from a local law office. We need to meet regarding an estate matter. It's urgent." My stomach dropped. "Estate? I'm sorry, what?" He paused, like he was choosing words carefully. "It involves your biological parents." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of my mattress like it could keep me steady. "My biological parents are... I don't know them." "I understand," he said. "That's why we need to meet. There are documents. Can you come in tomorrow?" My brain tried to protect me by insisting this was a scam, except he didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for account numbers. He sounded tired, like someone who makes hard calls for a living. I said yes, because what else do you say when a stranger drags your entire origin story out of the shadows? The next day, I left work early with my manager glaring at me like I'd committed a crime. I took the bus across town to an office building that smelled like old carpet and printer ink. The law office was modest. No dramatic glass walls. Just a waiting room with outdated magazines and a receptionist who looked like she'd seen everything. The lawyer was older than I expected, with tired eyes and a careful patience. He shook my hand and led me into a small office. He didn't waste time. "I'm sorry to tell you this, Nadine, but your biological parents passed away recently in a car accident." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. It felt wrong to be told something like that by a stranger in a beige office chair. It felt wrong to grieve people I'd never met, and yet my chest tightened like someone had wrapped a rope around it. He slid a folder across the desk. "They left a will. You are named as the sole heir." I blinked hard. "That's not possible." "It is," he said gently. "They updated their will after confirming your identity. How would they even..." I stopped because my voice was starting to shake and I hated that. I hated crying in front of people who had nothing to do with me. He opened the folder and explained the basics. My biological parents had built a small home renovation business. Nothing huge, not some dramatic corporate empire. Just local work. Kitchens, bathrooms, porches, the kinds of projects that keep towns running. They owned their home. They owned a smaller property they rented out. There was savings. There was a small piece of rural land inherited from a relative. I heard the words, but my brain kept snagging on one thing. They looked for me. The lawyer said, "They hired a private investigator to locate you. It wasn't magic, it was paperwork and persistence. They had an old record from the agency where the adoption started, and someone connected them to a retired caseworker who remembered enough to point them in the right direction. From there, it was public records and a lot of waiting. They eventually confirmed through a private test." My eyes stung. "They found me?" He nodded. "They intended to contact you in person. They had a meeting scheduled to discuss it. They didn't make it." The air left my lungs. The cruelty of the timing felt almost personal, like the universe was mocking me. "There is a letter," he added, and pulled out a sheet sealed in plastic like it was precious. It was handwritten, faded, and the first line made my throat close. It wasn't a long, dramatic speech. It was two scared teenagers admitting they were poor, pressured, and terrified. They wrote about loving me anyway. They wrote that giving me up was not them abandoning me, but them believing someone else could give me what they couldn't. They wrote they would come back when they could, even if it took years. They wrote my birth name, then crossed it out and wrote our baby instead. Like they didn't know what to call me without holding me. I cried in the most humiliating way, tears dripping onto my hands, sniffling, trying to apologize for making my face messy. The lawyer handed me tissues and waited. He didn't rush me. When I could speak again, I asked, what does this mean for me? Like, realistically? He said, there will be a process. Some of the value is tied up in property, not cash, but it's significant. Close to $1 million in total assets, mostly the house and the rental property. There are debts and taxes and fees, but you are the named heir. We can request a small advance for your immediate needs while things move. Advance, I repeated, like I didn't trust the word. He nodded. If approved, it can help you stabilize. I left the office with copies of paperwork, the letter, and a hollow feeling in my chest that wasn't just grief. It was grief mixed with rage. Because the universe had apparently decided to do the cruelest thing possible, prove I was wanted and then take the people who wanted me away before I could even hear their voices. On the bus ride back, I kept staring at strangers like one of them might suddenly look like me. I kept thinking, I have parents. I had parents. My brain couldn't decide which tents to live in. That night, I didn't just sit. I paced. I cleaned my tiny counter 3 times. I opened my closet and stared at my clothes like they were evidence. At some point, I realized I was doing what I always do when I'm scared, trying to control something small so I don't have to feel something huge. The next week, there was a memorial service. I almost didn't go. The idea of walking into a room full of people who actually knew my biological parents made me feel like an imposter. But the morning of the memorial, I stood in front of my mirror, trying to decide if black was too dramatic or not dramatic enough. Yes, my brain goes there. Not how do I grieve, but what is the acceptable outfit for grief I'm not sure I'm allowed to feel? I wore plain dark clothes and the cheapest makeup I owned, mostly so I wouldn't look like I'd been crying for days. The service was held in a small community hall that smelled like coffee and old folding chairs. There was a photo display near the front. My biological parents smiling in front of half-finished kitchens, standing beside clients, holding a dog I didn't know existed, laughing at something off camera. People moved quietly, respectful, and curious. When I walked in, heads turned. Not rude, just instinctive. A woman around my mother's age approached me, hands clasped, eyes soft. "You must be Nadine," she said. My throat tightened. Yeah. She nodded like she'd been waiting years to say that sentence. "They talked about you. Not constantly, but often enough. They were careful. They didn't want it to be about guilt. They just wanted you to know you were loved." I made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She hugged me before I could stop her. I stood stiff at first, then melted a little, because being held without it turning into a debt is a strange experience when you grew up like I did. People came up one by one. A guy with paint-stained hands told me they helped him when he was behind on rent. An older man said they built a ramp for his porch without charging extra because his wife used a walker. Someone said my biological mother always carried snacks, just in case someone needed them. I kept hearing stories that sounded like ordinary goodness, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but changes lives quietly. At the end, the woman who hugged me earlier handed me a small box. "This was in their home office," she said. "They had it set aside." Inside was a cheap little baby bracelet, tarnished, with my birth name engraved. I pressed it into my palm and my whole body went cold and hot at the same time. I didn't stay long after that. I stepped outside and sat alone on the curb behind the hall, holding the bracelet like it could anchor me. I felt furious at the timing. I felt grateful and angry and numb and everything at once. I also felt embarrassment, like I was late to my own life. On the bus ride home, I held the bracelet and stared at my reflection in the window, that ghosty overlay of my face against the city. I imagined my biological mother sitting beside me, telling me the story in her own words. I imagined my biological father making some tired joke to make me laugh. I imagined them seeing me and not needing to be convinced I belonged. When I got back to my room, I sat on my bed and did something I hadn't done in years. I almost called my adoptive mother for comfort. My finger hovered over her contact. I pictured her voice, the way it could soften for a second, then turn sharp and make everything my fault. I didn't call. I put my phone down like it was hot. A few days after the memorial, the lawyer arranged for me to visit my biological parents' house briefly with him, just to collect personal items that were clearly meant for me and to make sure the place was secure. Walking up to that front door felt like walking toward a life that could have been mine. The porch had worn steps, the kind you can picture someone sanding and repainting on a weekend. There were wind chimes that sounded soft in the breeze. ordinary details that somehow made my chest ache. Inside, the air smelled like sawdust and lemon cleaner. There were work boots by the door, a jacket hanging on a hook, a stack of mail on the counter. It hit me hard that they had been real, daily people. They drank coffee here. They argued here. They came home tired here. And I was a stranger standing in the middle of it. The lawyer stayed respectful, letting me drift from room to room. I found a small home office with folders neatly labeled and a calendar on the wall with a date circled. My name was written next to it in careful handwriting. I stared at it until my vision blurred. They had planned for me. They had put me on the schedule of their actual life. In a drawer, there was an envelope with my name on it. Inside were copies of public record searches. A couple of photos of me from social media that I didn't even remember posting. Nothing scandalous, just me holding a coffee, me at a bus stop, me at work in my uniform. The fact that they'd been quietly watching from a distance made me feel weird and warm and sad all at once. Like being loved from behind glass. I also found a small notebook with scattered notes. Call attorney. Finish kitchen estimate. Ask about meeting. Don't overwhelm her. Bring letter. The last one was underlined. I sat on the office chair and cried into my hands like a child. When I left the house, the lawyer asked if I wanted to see the business side too, just so nothing felt mysterious. So he drove, to a small workshop space where the renovation crew stored tools. The partner who'd been running day-to-day work met us there. He was polite, a little awkward, and he kept looking at me like he didn't want to say the wrong thing. They were good people, he said finally. They worked their butts off. They weren't rich, but they were generous. They talked about you like hope. Like the thing that kept them going when it was hard. I nodded because speaking felt impossible. He showed me a shelf with labeled bins, a work table covered in measuring tapes and screws, and a whiteboard with current jobs. It wasn't glamorous. It was just real work. And realizing my biological parents built this life with their hands, after starting with nothing, made me both proud and furious. Proud of them. Furious that I didn't get to hear them tell me themselves. A few days later, the lawyer called and said the advance had been approved. About $15,000. I stared at my bank app like it was a prank. Then I stared again. Then I stared until my eyes hurt. My first impulsive thought was to spend it all. Furniture, clothes, a whole new personality. But panic followed immediately. Because money doesn't just solve problems. It attracts them. So I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell my coworker at first. I told myself I was being careful. Really, I was hoarding one tiny secret, the way a starving person hides food. That week, my landlord taped a note to our front door. Rent was going up the next month, a big jump, written like a threat instead of a conversation. I read it twice, blinking like maybe the words would rearrange into something kinder. I used part of the advance to pay ahead and buy myself breathing room. The relief lasted about 12 minutes, until guilt showed up wearing my mother's voice. Because my mother did what she always does when she senses distance. She came looking. She called first. "You've been ignoring us," she said, like I'd stolen something. "I've been busy," I lied. "With what?" she pushed. "You don't have anything going on." That sentence, so casual, so cruel, hit harder than it should have. "I work," I said. "I have a life." My mother laughed. "Don't get defensive. We're just checking on you." The next day, she checked on me by showing up at my job. During a rush, when there were customers in line and my manager was already irritated, my mother walked in with her loud, sweet voice, the one she uses when she wants an audience. "There she is," she announced. "My daughter." My manager looked over, annoyed. Customers stared. My mother hugged me in front of the register like we were filming a commercial. Then she leaned in and whispered, "You look better. What's going on?" I hated that she noticed. I hated that she was hunting for a reason. "I'm fine," I said, stiff. She pulled back and smiled at my manager. "She's been stressed. She worries too much." Then she looked back at me, voice low. "Call me later. We need to talk." I didn't call, which was a mistake in my mother's world. She called me instead, repeatedly, until I answered just to stop the buzzing. "Your sister needs help," she said immediately. My stomach sank. "Help with what?" "Bills," my mother said like it was obvious. "Life is hard." Life was only hard for my sister when the world refused to hand her what she wanted. "I can't," I said. My mother's tone sharpened. "You can't, or you won't." "I don't have extra," I lied. My mother sighed dramatically. "So you're really going to punish us, after all we did?" "It's not punishment," I said, because I still wanted to be seen as reasonable. I'm just trying to survive. We're family, she said, syrupy. Family helps. Don't you want to be a good daughter? I almost caved. I could feel the old program running. Pay the guilt tax, keep the peace, don't make waves. Then I heard my father's voice from that dinner. Blood is blood. I'm not sending money, I said, and my voice was quiet but firm. My mother went cold. Fine, but don't come crying to us when you need something. After that, my sister started texting. Little messages at first. Hey, miss you. We should talk. Then sharper ones. Mom says you're acting weird. You think you're too good for us now? I didn't answer. She sent a selfie of her crying. I didn't answer that either. Then she sent, "What did you do to get money?" There it was. The assumption that anything good happening to me had to be explainable in a way that involved them. Around that time, my manager pulled me aside and said, "Your mother came in again, asking about your schedule." My stomach dropped. She did, my manager said, lips tight. And I told her I can't share employee info. But if this becomes a pattern, it becomes a problem. Customers don't need your personal drama. I wanted to scream that I didn't invite any of it. I wanted to scream that I was trying. Instead, I apologized, because my default is apologizing for other people's behavior. That night, I sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling and realized I couldn't keep living with my life this visible. My mother treated my routine like a map. If she couldn't control me emotionally, she'd corner me physically. That's when the idea of requesting my adoption-related records stopped being a thought and became a need. I didn't do it in a dramatic revenge way. I did it at 2 a.m. with shaky hands, filling out forms on my phone because it felt safer than thinking. I kept pausing, hovering over the submit button like I was about to press something that would explode. Part of me still believed I wasn't allowed to look behind the curtain. Part of me still believed my parents owned the story of my life. I hit submit anyway. Weeks passed. Life kept happening. I went to work. I smiled at customers who tossed coins on the counter like I was invisible. I came home to my room and tried to breathe. I told myself I would wait to make big moves until the estate was further along. Then the lawyer called again. "One of the properties can be made available for you to move into soon," he said. I froze. Soon like a few weeks, he said. "The house is empty. You are the named heir. While we finish the paperwork, you can stay there temporarily if we document everything and you take over the utilities. It's a practical step, not a magic one." It sounded almost unreal. A house. A real house. Not a room with a lock and a shared bathroom. A place where I could close a door and have it be mine. When I went to see it, it was in a quiet neighborhood with trees and sidewalks that didn't look like they were considering giving up. 3 bedrooms. A small yard. A porch. Nothing flashy, just steady. I walked through each room like I was afraid to touch anything. I opened closets. I ran my hand along a windowsill. I stood in the kitchen and pictured myself cooking without someone watching me like a hawk. Then I sat down on the living room floor and cried, because of course I did. I hired a modest moving service and packed my tiny room like I was escaping. I didn't have much. Some clothes, some books, a cheap lamp, dishes, and the letter. I carried the bracelet in my pocket like a secret. The move itself was ordinary and exhausting. Boxes, tape, sweating through my shirt. My coworker offered to help, and I said no at first out of reflex, then texted her later and said, "Actually, if you can spare an hour, I'd appreciate it." Even asking felt like lifting something heavy. She showed up, helped me carry boxes, and didn't make me feel like a burden. At one point, she looked around the empty living room and smiled softly. "You deserve this," she said. I didn't know what to say. "Thanks," I managed, which felt inadequate, but it was all I had. The first night I slept in the new house, I didn't sleep. I checked the locks 3 times. I walked room to room listening for creaks because my body didn't understand that quiet could be safe. I kept expecting a knock, a window tap, a text from my mother, something. Instead, there was just silence. Real silence. The kind that makes you realize how much noise you've been living with inside your head. The next morning, I woke up and made coffee in my own kitchen. I stood there holding the mug, staring at the sink, and it hit me like a wave. Nobody was going to tell me I owed them for this cup of coffee. I didn't have to earn it by being useful. It just existed. And that should have been the beginning of peace. But my family doesn't let peace exist without trying to break it. My mother found out in the most predictable way possible. A relative spotted the moving truck and texted her. I know because my mother later screamed about it. naming the person like she was furious at the leak more than the reality. The point is, there was a concrete trigger, a truck, a new address, the neighborhood grapevine doing what it always does. 2 days after I moved in, my phone lit up with calls. I didn't answer. Then my mother showed up. I was carrying a box from the porch when I heard my name shouted from the sidewalk. Nadine! I froze. Then I turned and saw my parents' car parked crookedly at the curb. My sister got out first, wearing a smile that looked pasted on. My mother followed, eyes wide, scanning the house like it was a prize. My father stepped out last, slower, looking irritated like he'd already decided this was my fault. My mother hurried up the walkway. We heard you moved. Why didn't you tell us? I held the box tighter. Because I didn't want you here. My mother gasped like I'd slapped her. Nadine, don't be like that. We're your family. My sister drifted past me and peeked into the living room. Wow, she said. This is nice. Must be expensive. My father asked, how are you paying for this? The shame rose instantly, like I'd stolen something. Then I remembered the letter, the proof, the fact that my biological parents left this to me because they wanted me to have it. I straightened. It's my house. My mother's eyes narrowed. How? I don't have to explain, I said, and I hated that my voice shook. I wanted to sound like an adult. Instead, I sounded like a kid asking permission. My mother stepped closer. Don't be rude. Let us inside. We want to see. No, I said louder. You need to leave. My sister scoffed. Money really did change you. I didn't have money before, I snapped, surprising myself. I had nothing, and you still treated me like I was the problem. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We're just happy for you. We want to be part of your life. My father muttered. This is ridiculous. I set the box down and stood between them and my front door. You can't just show up. You can't just walk in. My mother waved a hand, dismissing the concept of boundaries. We raised you. Don't start acting like a stranger. I am a stranger, I said, and the truth of it hit me as I said it. You made me one. My sister crossed her arms. If you're going to be dramatic, we'll leave, but don't come crying when you need us. My mother leaned in, voice soft and poisonous. Pride comes before a fall. I stared at her. Please go. My father grabbed my mother's elbow and pulled her back toward the car. My mother kept looking over her shoulder like she expected me to chase her and apologize. I didn't. When they drove off, I went inside, closed the door, and slid down to the floor shaking. I wasn't proud. I wasn't triumphant. I was terrified. Because for the first time, I'd told them no and didn't take it back. The next morning, there was a handwritten note in my mailbox. No name. Just, pride comes before the fall. My stomach turned. It sounded like my mother, but it could have been anyone. Either way, it wasn't about safety. It was about control. So I handled it like an adult, not a character in a movie. I replaced my mailbox with a locking one. I put up a cheap door camera. I told myself if anyone wanted to be dramatic, they could be dramatic on video. Nothing happened after that, which almost made it worse because it proved the note was meant to rattle me, not harm me. A couple of days later, my sister showed up alone, carrying 2 overstuffed trash bags like luggage. She stood on my porch like she'd been dropped there by fate. You're home, she said. My whole body went tense. What do you want? She sighed like I was the difficult one. I need to stay here for a bit. I blinked. No. She rolled her eyes, already pushing past the word. I'm serious. The place I'm in is complicated. What does complicated mean? I asked. And I hated that part of me still wanted to help. It means my roommate is being a psycho and I'm not dealing with it, she said. You have space. I saw it. You're not staying here, I said. You didn't ask. You just showed up with bags. She scoffed. Because if I ask, you'll say no. That's not a reason, I snapped. That's the reason you shouldn't be here. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Don't be petty. You have so much now. It's disgusting watching you act like you're struggling. I felt something hot flash up. You don't know what I have, she laughed. Everybody knows you got money. Mom said you've been acting different, like you're hiding something. Get off my porch, I said. Her face twisted. You're really going to turn your back on me? You turned your back on me my whole life, I wanted to say. Instead, I just repeated, leave. She moved like she was going to test me, like she was used to testing me. She pushed her shoulder against the doorframe, trying to wedge herself forward. And that's when I realized I was about to lose control of my own house because my sister did not believe my boundaries were real. So I called for help. The operator's voice was calm. The responding officers were calm too. Tired, normal people doing an ordinary job. One spoke to me on the porch while the other spoke to my sister by the curb. My sister played innocent perfectly. "She's my sister," she said loud enough for me to hear. "I'm just trying to stay with family. She's having some kind of episode." I felt like I was going to throw up. There it was, the narrative. I was unstable. I was dramatic. I was the problem. I showed the officer my sister's texts. I explained quietly that my family didn't respect boundaries and I needed them to leave. He nodded like he'd heard this story 100 times in different houses. No one got arrested. No one got cuffed. This wasn't a show. They told my sister she had to leave and warned her that if she came back and refused again, it could be considered trespassing. As she walked to her car, she hissed, "You're dead to me." That night, my mother sent a long voice message full of sobbing. "How could you do that to your sister?" They came to our house asking questions. "Do you want people to think we're criminals?" I stared at the message and felt something strangely calm. They were worried about appearances. Not my safety, not my panic, just appearances. I didn't reply. I deleted it. Then I sat on my kitchen floor and laughed quietly at the absurdity of it all, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to crumble. 2 days later, the envelope from the state arrived. The records I'd requested weeks earlier. I opened it on my living room floor like I was diffusing something. The documents were partially redacted, but there were enough notes and amounts to make my skin go cold. They had received monthly support for years because of the adoption arrangement. The total over all those years added up to a number that made my throat tighten. I thought about my childhood shoes with holes, the dentist visits we couldn't afford, the school trip I begged for and got denied, the way my sister somehow always had new things, the way my mother acted like feeding me was charity. It was like seeing my whole childhood reframed in ink. I went to my parents' house the next day, not with a big speech, but with that thick envelope in my hands and rage in my chest. I took the bus there and sat in the back, staring at the envelope like it might explode. My mother opened the door with suspicious eyes. "What are you doing here?" I held up the papers. "Explain this." Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the first page. "Where did you get that?" "That's your first question?" My voice came out sharper than I meant. Not, "What is it?" but "Where did you get it?" My mother's jaw tightened. We did what we had to do. My sister appeared behind her, already rolling her eyes. "Oh my God, are you trying to start drama again?" I looked at my father. "You got money. Every month. For years. For me." He shrugged. "We had expenses." "What expenses?" My voice cracked. "I slept on a mattress that smelled like mold. I wore secondhand clothes. I never got braces even though you mocked my teeth." "What expenses?" My mother's face hardened. "That money kept this house running. So you used me to pay your bills," I said, and the words tasted like metal. My mother leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Watch your mouth. You don't get to come in here acting like a saint. We fed you. We kept you. We gave you a name. You want to talk money? How much do you think it costs to raise a child?" My sister snorted. "Maybe you should be grateful you weren't left in the system." There it was again. Lucky. Grateful. Like my existence was a chore they tolerated. My instinct to apologize rose up automatically. I could almost feel my mouth forming the words. Then I swallowed hard. "I don't want the money back," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "I want you to stop pretending you sacrificed for me, because there's a paper trail. You weren't martyrs. You were paid." My mother's face went red. "How dare you?" My father stood up. "If you're going to disrespect us, you can leave." I stared at them. "What family?" I asked quietly. And that was the moment the room changed. Even my sister stopped smirking for a second, like the truth hit her in the face and she didn't like how it felt. I left. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I left with my hands shaking and my stomach in knots. On the bus ride back, I stared out the window and felt something I didn't expect. Relief. Like I'd finally said a truth out loud, and the sky hadn't fallen. Of course the sky didn't fall. My mother just called me a dozen times that night. I didn't answer. Then the rumors started. My coworker called after her shift and said, "I don't want to freak you out, but your sister is telling people you got money doing something illegal. Like, shady stuff." I felt cold spread through my chest. "Of course she is. And there's a fundraiser post," she added. "It has your childhood photo. It says you abandoned your family, and they need help." My mouth went dry. "Send it." When I saw it, rage rose so fast I felt dizzy. My face as a kid. The caption calling me cold. Comments from people who didn't know me saying things like family is family and don't forget where you came from. There was a donation link. People had already given money. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my own face and thought, so this is what they do when they can't control me privately. They make me a villain publicly. I did something reckless, but not cinematic. I didn't show up screaming with a megaphone. I paid for a ride to my parents' house because the bus felt too slow for the rage buzzing in my skin. My mother answered the door with fake surprise. "Oh, Nadine, are you here to apologize?" I held up my phone. "Take it down." My mother blinked. "Take what down?" "The fundraiser, the lies." My picture. My mother's face hardened. "Your sister is just trying to help. We need assistance. Bills are high." "You're using my face," I said. "You're saying I abandoned you." My mother scoffed. "You did." My sister appeared behind her, smirking. "You could just give us some, like a decent person." "So this is about money," I said. My sister tilted her head. "Isn't everything? You had no problem taking from us." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You got paid to raise me." My mother's eyes flashed. "Stop bringing that up. You always want to play victim." "I'm asking you to stop lying," I snapped. My sister shrugged. "People are donating. It's working." I wanted to grab my phone and throw it at the wall. Instead, I said, "If you don't take it down, I'm reporting it." My mother laughed. "To who? You think anyone cares?" That was the moment I realized they genuinely believed no one would hold them accountable, because my whole life I hadn't. I left. My hands were clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. Back home, I sat in my living room and felt trapped by my own fear. I had a house, I had resources, I had proof, and I still felt like a kid in their kitchen. So I called a therapist. I'd never done therapy before. In my family, feelings were treated like inconveniences. But I couldn't keep living with my nervous system stuck in survival mode and calling it normal. I found someone local with availability and a calm voice. In our first session, I described my life like a list, because that's how I protect myself. I make pain sound casual. She listened, then asked, "What do you want?" I stared at the carpet. "Peace." She nodded. "And what are you willing to do to get it?" I didn't have an answer. That was the problem. I'd spent my whole life reacting, not choosing. Over the next weeks, the situation escalated anyway. My sister tried to open a credit account in my name. I only found out because an alert letter arrived at my house. Seeing my name on something I didn't request made my stomach flip. I called, stopped the attempt, froze my credit, set up fraud alerts, and filed a basic identity theft report so there was a record. It didn't become a big legal saga. It didn't lead to dramatic consequences. It just became one more quiet proof of how far she was willing to go. And it became one more reason I stopped questioning myself. My therapist asked, "What does it mean that she tried that?" "It means," I said, voice flat, "she thinks I'm hers to use." While all that was happening, I reported the fundraiser to the hosting platform. I attached proof it used my image without permission and contained false claims. They asked for more documentation. I sent everything: screenshots, texts, the letter from the lawyer, the fraud alert. Then I waited, because that's what real life is. Waiting. Holding your breath while systems slowly do what they do. My therapist asked if I wanted to expose my family publicly. I said no. I didn't want a war. I wanted the lies to stop. I wanted my childhood face taken off a begging post like I was a missing pet. But I also realized something. My family had built a whole narrative about me over years. If I didn't anchor the truth somewhere, I'd keep being pulled under their version. So I invited a small group of people to my house. Not a party, not an ambush, just witnesses. My coworker came because she'd seen the fundraiser and was furious on my behalf. 2 women from my old neighborhood came because they were tired of my mother acting like a saint when they'd seen me hauling trash and babysitting and being treated like help. The owner of the laundry place came because she'd watched my mother send me in with bags of clothes and no coins like it was my problem. A distant cousin came because, in his own awkward way, he wanted to understand. I also brought a plain language explanation letter I'd requested about the assistance program, and I invited a woman who worked at a community center, someone who knew these systems in everyday terms and didn't mind saying, "Yes, this exists, and here's generally what it means," without acting like it was a courtroom. I felt sick the whole day. I set out water and cheap snacks like I was hosting a meeting at work. I hated that I cared about being polite while my life was on fire. When everyone was seated, I laid out the documents on my coffee table. The letter from my biological parents. Proof of the estate process. The assistance records, the bank alert about the credit attempt, screenshots of the fundraiser. I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone, I said, voice shaking. I'm doing it because I'm tired of being lied about. I'm tired of questioning my own childhood. Then I called my mother and told her to come over. She arrived with my sister, of course. My father trailed behind them, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. They walked into my living room and froze when they saw people there. My mother's eyes widened. What is this? A conversation, I said. Sit down. My mother laughed nervously. Are you trying to humiliate us? My sister scoffed. This is so dramatic. I took a breath and started laying it out. Not as a legal case, but as my life. My mother interrupted constantly, calling me ungrateful, calling me cruel, saying I was twisting things. My sister joked, shrugged, performed. My father barely spoke until he did, and then it was blunt and angry. You owe us. The woman from the community center explained calmly what those assistance records generally mean and why they exist. The laundry owner said she remembered my mother complaining about having to keep me. One of the neighborhood women said quietly, I saw how you treated her, and my mother's face went pale. My cousin shifted uncomfortably and said, Families fight. Maybe everyone should just forgive. I stared at him. Forgive what? I asked. Forgive them using my picture to get donations? Forgive them telling me I'm lucky to exist? My mother started crying, real tears this time. We loved you. I laughed softly. You loved having someone to control. My sister snapped, You're insane. My father stood up and slammed his hand on my coffee table. We're leaving. My mother wiped her face and hissed, One day you'll need us, and when you do, don't come crawling back. They left, and the room felt like it had been drained of oxygen. That night, after everyone went home, I got an email from the platform. The fundraiser had been removed and the account holder had been warned. I stared at the screen, and instead of feeling victory, I felt tired. I sent a screenshot to my coworker and to the two women from my old neighborhood, not to gloat, but to anchor reality. They replied with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. The fundraiser was gone, but the gossip wasn't going to vanish. People who liked the drama would keep the version they preferred. About a month after the fundraiser mess, someone from a local church knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. An older man, polite smile, hands folded like he was delivering peace itself. I'm not here to take sides, he said immediately, which is always how you know someone is about to take a side. Your mother is very worried. She says there's been a misunderstanding. I stared at him through the screen door, still in pajamas, hair a mess, coffee breath, feeling that old impulse to perform good girl for an authority figure. It's not a misunderstanding, I said. He tilted his head sympathetically. Families go through seasons. Pride can make things worse. I almost laughed at the déjà vu. Pride isn't why I froze my credit, I said. Pride isn't why my face was used to ask strangers for money. His smile faltered, just a little. Sometimes people act out of desperation. Sometimes people act out of entitlement, I replied. And my voice stayed calmer than I expected. I'm not asking anyone to hate them. I'm asking them to stop crossing boundaries. He tried one more gentle push about forgiveness, about letting go. I nodded like I was listening, because I'm still learning not to apologize for existing. Then I said, I'm letting go by not letting them in. That's what letting go looks like for me. He hesitated, then gave a quiet, I'll pray for you, and left. When the door closed, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt shaky, but I also felt something new. The shaky feeling didn't automatically turn into guilt. It just passed. In the following weeks, I felt the social hangover. A couple of people reached out with awkward messages like, I didn't know, or I hope you're okay. Some people went silent. Some doubled down and acted like I was still the villain because that story made them feel morally superior. I had to accept something painful. Not everyone wants the truth. Some people want a simple story with a hero and a villain, and my family was offering them that on a plate. Months passed. The estate moved forward. My biological parents' small company was sold to the partner who'd already been running daily operations. Because I didn't have the headspace to manage a business while grieving. I didn't want to cosplay as a boss while my nervous system still lived in a childhood kitchen. I kept my work schedule steady, then transitioned into a basic administrative role that kept me out of the public counter spotlight. Once I changed jobs, the surprise visits stopped, mostly because my family couldn't find my routine as easily anymore. Being less visible felt like breathing. I paid off the house once everything cleared enough to make that feel safe. The rental property stayed rented, and I learned slowly how to handle normal adult problems without turning them into panic spirals. The first time a tenant texted me about a leaky sink, I stared at the message for 10 minutes as if it were a test. Then I hired a repair person, paid the bill, and cried afterward because doing a normal thing felt like climbing a mountain. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I bought an older used car. Not because I was trying to show off, because I was tired of the bus schedule controlling my life and tired of feeling exposed walking everywhere. The first time I drove alone to a grocery store, I sat in the parking lot with my hands on the steering wheel and realized I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I was just living. My therapist did an exercise with 2 empty chairs, one for each biological parent, and told me to say what I needed to say. I thought it would feel silly. It didn't. It felt like someone cracked open a locked room inside me. I told the empty chairs, voice shaking, that I spent my whole life believing I wasn't worth much, that I was told I should be grateful just to exist, that their letter was proof I wasn't disposable, that I was furious they didn't get to find me sooner and furious that the reunion was stolen by timing, that I was trying to build a life that didn't revolve around fear. I cried until my face ached. I didn't feel instantly healed. I felt human. I still get updates sometimes. My coworker hears things from old customers and she'll say, "Your mother is still talking," like it's a weather report. My sister is still in the same cycle, blaming everyone else for her mess. My parents are still in the same house, still making the same choices. There was no dramatic collapse, no redemption montage, no perfect ending. There was just me, waking up in my own house, making coffee, and realizing my stomach wasn't clenched. Some mornings I still get the urge to unblock my mother just to tell her off one more time. I'm not proud of that. Some days I still replay that dinner where my father said blood is blood and imagine myself standing up sooner. Some days I still feel like I'm overreacting because that's what being dismissed for years does to your brain. But then I look at the bracelet and the letter. I look at the quiet kitchen. I look at the lock on my mailbox and the little camera by my door that nobody has tested again. I look at the bills I pay without anyone shaming me for taking up space. And I remember the simplest truth I had to learn the hard way. I don't owe anyone my peace. I used to think closure meant seeing them suffer. I'm not proud of that thought, but it's true. When you've been treated like trash, part of you wants the people who did it to feel your pain, but closure started to look different. It looked like buying myself a pair of shoes because I wanted them, not because mine had holes. It looked like letting my phone ring without flinching. It looked like saying no and not apologizing for it afterward. My adoptive family didn't explode. They didn't crumble. They just kept going, loud and convinced they were right. And I kept going too, quieter, not because I lost, but because I finally stopped performing for them. I finally stopped trying to earn a place at a table where I was always the unpaid help. It's not tidy. It's not fair. It's not a movie. Sometimes, late at night, I still catch myself waiting for the sound of my phone buzzing with my mother's name, even though I changed my number and blocked everything I could think of. Trauma is annoying like that. It doesn't care about logic. But then I'll do something small and normal. Wash a plate, fold laundry, lock the door, and I'll notice my shoulders aren't up around my ears. I'll notice I'm not rehearsing excuses in my head. I'll notice the silence isn't threatening anymore. And in those moments, I don't feel like the lucky, adopted kid they kept reminding me of. I feel like a woman who finally stopped auditioning for love that was never going to be given freely. It's just real.